somebody goes from being a non-Christian to being a fully committed disciple in an instant. But what happens, so people go through this sort of process, and we are just called to do the next step. So when we evangelize, the thing to do is to work out where the person is spiritually before you begin. So for example, the first thing is just really to start talking to them. Because the first step is trust. Building trust. Because nobody is going to listen to you, to somebody that they don't trust. And in fact, one of the problems that has been in the church, in the Catholic Church, over the last years in evangelization has been the paedophile scandal with the priests. Okay? Now, it might have only been a very small group of priests doing it, but it really affected the image of the church. And people who didn't know anything about the church just thought the church was full of paedophiles. Now, this is what this lad said to me, you know, all he knew about, that's what he knew about the Catholic Church was paedophile priests and corruption at the Vatican. That's what he knew, because that's what he'd seen on television. So it's been very difficult even to establish that first step of trust. Okay? Whereas now, Pope Francis, I would say, single-handedly, on his own, just by his personality and the things that he's done, he has somehow wiped away that image, that bad image of the church. So now, Pope Francis has opened the door a bit for us. Open the door. And that is why we should take advantage of that now, while there is that very positive thing towards the Catholic Church. So after, as I said, that first thing of trust, the next step is curiosity. Because, as I said, like with Pope Francis now, people are like, so what do Catholics believe? I don't know, maybe if you're working in a hospital or something, or wherever you're working, people maybe, because of Pope Francis, because he's in the papers and things, people might start to ask, so what do you Catholics believe? Or, you know, every Saturday you always ask for Saturday, you know, the second Saturday off. Why is that? And it's just that you can say, well, instead of just saying, oh well, we had a day out with the family, you could say, you know, we went to a thing that's called Second Saturday. Now, I was taught an interesting kind of tip, I was given an interesting tip by someone in evangelizing. Because I know when I first came to the Lord, I was so enthusiastic about what God had done for me that I would give people my testimony whether they wanted to hear it or not. And so some people were interested, but other people, they would start to get glazed, and I would keep going, and they would be kind of backing away from me, and I wouldn't even be noticing, because I would be so trying to get my message across. Okay? But that is not evangelization, that is abuse, actually. Okay? If you try and force what you believe on somebody and they're not interested, that, you know, is counterproductive. So a lot of evangelization is listening and being able to discern where a person is at and if they are interested or not. And this is what this guy said to me is, don't tell them the whole thing, he said, because if they're interested, they'll ask a question. And once they stop asking questions, they're not interested. Okay? Now, so maybe people are a little bit interested, but they don't want the whole thing. So you say, I went to Second Saturday, and what's that? Oh, it's kind of a Catholic convention, and we have talks. And then that might be it. That might be enough for the person, in which case you just leave it at that. Okay? But it could be they go, oh, so is it in a church? You know, people will ask different things. You know, depending on where they're at spiritually, they will then ask, and then you will know what to tell them. I was coming last year, just in February, I was flying back from Malta, And it was fascinating because we'd had a workshop precisely on these 5 steps. And I was sitting on the plane next to this guy who'd been on a package holiday. And I started chatting to him, and I thought, right, I'm going to see if these 5 steps, if they work. So I started just, normal chatting about, where he'd been, and he said he'd been on this package holiday, and he was telling me about what he'd been to see, and the food he'd eaten, and whatever. Now, because I was listening to him, he then started asking me questions, because that's normal, isn't it? If you're having a conversation, you ask someone questions, and then, once again, if they're interested in you, or they'll start asking questions back. So he said, what about you? Where have you been? And I said, oh, well, I've been on a Christian sort of weekend at this hotel. He said, oh, was it good? I said, yeah. And then he said, oh, I know some Christians at work. So he's now wanting to continue the conversation. So he's not a Christian. In fact, it turns out I think he was a Hindu, a non-practicing Hindu. But he said, oh, he's a very good man, this man at work. But he said, I don't really know what he believes. Okay, so obviously, the man at work who was a Christian was a very good witness, and he liked him, and he thought there was something good about him, but he had never spoken to him about faith. So I knew then we had trust, because he sort of trusted me, he was happy to have a conversation. There was trust with his friend who at work, and there was curiosity. He was a little bit curious. So we continued a bit the conversation, and then I realised he was actually quite open. And he wasn't like a firm Hindu, he was like a non-practicing Hindu. So I realised he obviously, was kind of, was seeking a bit, and he'd gone through some difficult times in the past and things. And so then I sort of, so I thought, right, I'm going to go to the next step. I said, because he talked about having these problems, which had made him, he had suffered from depression, and he had to give up work. So I said, would you mind if I prayed with you? Now, I was talking to Shaila, and one thinks that praying with people is just really, very daring, you know what I mean? And most people would say no, but in actual fact, I have found the complete opposite. That people might not be open to an invitation to come to church, but the only people who've ever refused prayer have actually been very committed Catholics, because they kind of feel, no, I'm suffering, or, I don't know what this is, and, because they've got a very firm idea. But particularly people who are not believers are very open to being prayed with, because they just see it as an act of love. Because, in the same way, they would be, if someone said, let me do your tarot cards for you, they'd do that as well, because they have no discernment. So that is why it's very important for us to offer this kind of help. So I said, do you mind if I pray with you? And he said, okay. So I prayed with him, and I didn't really know what I said, just Lord bless him. You don't even have to say anything particular. Please help him with all his health problems and his difficulties in his life. Amen. I could sort of, it was like a little tear coming, Holy Spirit acting. So then, once again, I'm honestly, I get fed up with giving away my Bibles, because it's getting quite expensive. So then I thought, actually, I think he's, I need to give him something else. So I said, this is, this is a sacred book, if you read this, this will help you to kind of get closer to God. And he took it. Now, I don't know what happened to him after that, but I did my bit, and in a way he's in God's hands, just like his work colleague, just witnessed to him and showed he was a good person. Then he put him next to me because I'm a bit more gabby, so I was able to do the gabby bit. And you don't know what's going to happen after that, because you don't have to do the whole thing, you just do your little bit. And it's, as I said, it's this thing of really being open to people to know that all kinds of strange people actually are searching, and it's to not judge people and put them into boxes and think they're the enemy or I shouldn't be associating with them. By nature, I've got a bit of a corrective spirit, so I like to be right and do things right, and sometimes you can project that onto other people, and that often happens with, good church people who have this sort of judgmental spirit about others. And God was speaking to me about this, and he was saying, Kristina, just love people. And that in itself would be evangelistic. And I'm thinking, well, that sounds a bit wishy-washy, I don't know about that, Anyway, I was with some friends, and we went into this cafe in London, and there wasn't enough room for us all, so we had to join a table where there was a lady sitting on her own. And I was the one who got sitting next to her. And as I was sitting next to her, I saw she had a pile of books next to her. And I thought, oh, they were all about tarot cards. Now, in the past, I would have thought, the enemy, and I would have ignored her. Or I would have thought, that is very dangerous, reading books on tarot cards. I better kind of engage in conversation so I can tell her not to do tarot cards. But I thought, no, I won't do that. I'll do what God has been telling me, love people instead. So I said, oh, tarot cards. Are you a professional tarot card reader? And she said, no, but I'm very interested in that. I said, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, so she started to tell me about her interests, and basically she was very interested in New Age and all kinds of sort of, different healings and things like that. And I was interested just to really know where she was coming from. And I said, once again, in evangelization, listening is one of the key things. So I was listening to her. And then, because I had given her that respect of listening to her, she then said, and what about you? What do you do? Because she was thinking, who is this person talking to me? And I said, oh, I work for something called the Charismatic Renewal. And she said, what's that? So I said, well, it's kind of Christian renewal movement, and I started to share a little bit. I gave her a sort of 3-minute testimony. And this is why, when you're evangelizing, you should always have at your fingertips some little stories about how God has helped you in your life, how you came to faith, how God healed you, how God provided you, some little story. Anyway, I gave my personal witness of how I came to Christ. And I thought, I wonder what she's going to say now. Is she going to go and think I'm the enemy? She didn't. She was really interested. And I thought, who would have thought it? Anyway, at the end, she said, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. She said, I could see when you came that you had something. It's so lovely to meet somebody on my wavelength. She said, I've got to go now, but it would be great if we could meet up sometime and have a chat. Now, in fact, as things turned out, I never did see her again. But God really showed me, that we can think people are the enemy, and they're not the enemy at all. They're spiritually seeking, but they're looking in the wrong places. And we have the water of life. We have the creator of the universe. We have what they're looking for. And sometimes it's the way we behave that puts people off. Now, obviously, if she was going to become a disciple of Christ, that, she would have to leave aside the tarot cards. But they were not the first thing. And until she's experienced the love of God and the love of Jesus and the power of the Spirit, and knows that they're so much better than tarot cards, she wouldn't have the strength to leave the tarot cards, and it would just be like you were trying to impose your view on her. I mean, it's a bit like with the Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it? Because the problem with them is they don't listen either. They just try and convince you that you're wrong. They're not really coming to share. And because you know they're not going to listen, you don't even want to talk to them because they've got an agenda. So with us, it shouldn't be that we're like the Jehovah's Witnesses who have an agenda. It should be that we're there to love people and to trust that we're just going to be used to the extent that God wants to use us. And, you know, because being a disciple is a journey. It's a journey. And it's like Pope Francis says, you know, he was saying that, you know, a lot of the Catholic morality is not really suitable for people who have no faith, because they don't have the strength to do it. You know, and Pope Francis is getting criticised, isn't he? Because they say, oh, he's very liberal. Pope Francis is not liberal, but he's compassionate, and he knows where people are at. He says, you know, it's like on a battlefield. If somebody is dying, you don't say, have you had your cholesterol done? You don't do that, because it's irrelevant. When someone's dying, you tend their wounds, you take them to the hospital, and then once they've recovered and they're back home, you then might say, well, maybe you ought to do something about your diet and, you know, take some pills or whatever. But the first thing is to help them. And this is how we have to be as well. We have to take people where they are and walk with them. Pope Francis says we have to go to the margins. We have to go to people and walk with them and love them. And even if they don't accept the gospel, still walk with them. Because that is also the danger. That we only are interested in them if we can get them as souls, rather than really loving them as people, which is what Jesus did. I know I was very challenged some years ago when I read, has anybody heard of Father Emiliano Tardif? He was a famous, he was a Canadian missionary who worked in the Dominican Republic, and he developed a healing ministry and was very well known for his healing ministry. And this particular time he was in the Dominican Republic and doing his healing ministry, and he had a word of knowledge that a woman was being healed of cancer. And you know when they give those words of knowledge and then people put their hands up and claim it, nobody claimed it. So it was a bit embarrassing for Father Tardif, but you know, he just went on. Anyway, the next day a woman came up to him and said, Father Tardif, you know, there was a healing, it was me. I was the woman, you know, with stomach cancer, but I'm a prostitute, she said, and I felt embarrassed about being in the church because everyone knows me and they would think I didn't have a right to be in here. So Father Tardif, I just want to say thank you. I want to thank the Lord and acknowledge the Lord for my healing. Anyway, so she went back to she lived in a brothel, because often in Latin America, or you know, it's a kind of, it's very institutionalized, there's lots of brothels and things. And so anyway, so she lived in the brothel, and she told the other prostitutes what Jesus had done for her. Anyway, the other prostitutes were really impressed, as they well might be, and they thought, let's have a prayer meeting. So they decided they'd have a prayer meeting on that Monday afternoon, and they closed the brothel for business and they had the prayer meeting. Anyway, a few other prostitutes heard about it and thought, that's really cool, and they said, I think we'll do one in our brothel as well. So it became a thing in that town that on Monday afternoons the brothels would close and they would have a prayer meeting in the brothel. Anyway, at the end of the year, Father Tardif said he was approached by one of the ladies who said, Father, you know, we've been meeting for a year now, we'd really like a retreat. Would you give us a retreat? So Father Tardif said, oh, okay then. And he was thinking, okay. So he contacted one of the ladies that he worked with called Maria San Giovanni, and he said, Maria, would you kind of like help me to this retreat? He said, I've never done a retreat for prostitutes before. And she said, I haven't either. Anyway, so they were sort of, and then I heard her give a talk in Panama when she was talking about this retreat. She said, you know, I just didn't know what to say. I was, Lord, what am I going to say to them? And anyway, come the day of the retreat, you know, she went in, there were 60 women who signed up, 60 ladies who signed up for this retreat. And Maria went in, so I guess it would be like this. She looked at them and was like, I don't know what I'm going to say. So she rushed in front of the Blessed Sacrament, knelt down in front of the Blessed Sacrament and said, Lord, you've got to give me a word right now because I don't know what to say. And she said, in her heart, she heard the Lord say, Maria, I don't know what your problem is. To me, they're not prostitutes. To me, they're my daughters, and I love them with so much love, and they're as pure as lilies. So Maria stood up and she said this to the ladies. Okay? And Tardif said it was the most grace-filled retreat he had ever done. He said, at the end of the weekend, he said, of the 60 women who were there, 29 gave their lives totally to Christ and left their way of life and became full-time catechists for the Lord. Okay? And 3 years later, when the book was written, 27 out of the 29 were still continuing with the Lord. And the town, which was known as the town of prostitution, 80% of the brothels had closed down. That was done by one prostitute who had a healing from the Lord and who went back. And she didn't say, oh, this is terrible, you're all terrible. No! Because often people end up in situations like that for all kinds of reasons, and it's the same with all of us. Sometimes people end up in it was a sinful situation, but in sinful situations for all kinds of reasons. And Jesus says, you know, he comes for the sick, he comes for the sinners, he doesn't come for the healthy people. And that was always the problem with the Pharisees, because the Pharisees thought they didn't need God, they were okay. And I know that was a problem in my own life. Like, because I always kept the rules, I didn't need Jesus, really, you know, because I was okay. Everybody thought I was okay, but I wasn't, because I had a judgmental spirit. And I said that's one of the difficulties. You know, that's what's so beautiful about Pope Francis. You know, he was asked by a famous Jesuit when he had this interview for a magazine, and the man said, who is Francis? And he said, I am a sinner whom God has looked on with mercy. And that is how we all should feel. We are sinners whom God has looked on with mercy. And that is why we've got good news for everybody. Because Jesus came for the sinners. So it doesn't matter how inadequate you are. It doesn't matter how sinful you are. Because you're the ones that Jesus has come for. You know, we are the ones that Jesus has come for. And it's only to the extent that one knows one's own sinfulness that you know the mercy of God. And I know it's something that I constantly struggle with it. God is constantly saying to me, you know, I love you, Kristina, and it's okay. Because I get sort of upset that I'm such a Pharisee. But you know, as long as I know I'm a Pharisee, as long as I can recognize it and I can call out to God for mercy to help me, then I have an opportunity to change. It's when you think you're okay that there's no room for change. Because being a Christian is not about being a good person or a perfect person. It's about being a sinner whom God has looked on with mercy and who knows that it's only with the help of God they can do anything at all. And it's when you know that you've got something to tell other people. Because if it's just because you're a strong person and you don't drink or you don't fornicate or you don't, bully for you, but what good is that for someone who's struggling with these things? But if you can say, I struggled with this, but God came and helped me and set me free, that is the good news, and you can say it with conviction because it's from your own life. And this is what people need to hear. They don't want, most people, they can't relate to Christian theology, but they can relate to human stories. They can relate to what God has done for you. And that is what we have to talk about. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Iona in Scotland, and I was staying in a bed and breakfast. And the lady there didn't go to church at all. But, you know, I was chatting to her, just because, you know, I was just her and me at breakfast time. And I was talking a little bit about some of God's provision in my life and the way God had provided for me. And she said, you know, God has also provided for me. And she told me about how her husband had died when she was quite young. And she had 2 children, and she lived on this little croft on the island with no means of income and a big mortgage. And she just didn't know what to do. And she said, but then they brought a pipe over, and there was a whole lot of workmen that came, and she was rung up, and they said, oh, would you house these workmen who are, you know, going to do this work on the island? And she'd never done it before, but she said, okay, and she pulled the children, I think, into her bedroom, and then she let out the other rooms in the house. And the men were really lovely who came, and they even helped her you know, deal with the animals and things like that. And she said, God was there for me. And I realised that in hearing me talking about God providing for me, she recognised in her own life, even though she wasn't a churchgoer, I mean, she might have had a bit of a Christian background, she recognised, gosh, that's happened to me. And the thing is, God doesn't just help Christians, He actually is helping everybody, but people are not recognising it. So part of evangelism is helping people to recognise God working in their lives and putting a name to it and saying, you know, that was God. That wasn't just a lucky break, that was God. Because it's only, I remember it was when I went to the prayer group and I heard people giving their witnesses, I started realising myself, oh, that was God, was it? I didn't know that. So that is also what part of evangelism is, and why it's important to witness. Because you're not just kind of boasting, but you're helping to stir other people up and helping them to recognise God in their lives. And as I say, God loves everybody, and He's trying to help everybody. And the reason people sin is usually because they feel alone and they feel there's nobody looking out for them. Whereas God is looking out for them if only they would give Him the chance. I remember I experienced a bit this myself, in that this was quite a few years ago, and because I was working for the renewal, and it was at the beginning, I had a very, very low salary. And I knew when I took on the job, it would mean I'd never have a car, I'd never have a flat, I'd never be able to go away on holiday, you know, just the minimum, you know, I'd have a room and that was it. But I thought, okay, that's fine, Lord. And but I'd been doing a bit of freelance for, I think it was the Universe, I'm a journalist, and I'd been getting some money. And I thought, oh wow, this summer I want to go on a walking holiday. And I think because I've been doing this extra freelance, I'll have enough money to go on a holiday. So I was really excited about it. But then I realised I hadn't paid my taxes. And I'm like thinking, I know, but nobody will know, will they? And, you know, I mean, and Lord, I'm working for you and I'm on a really low income. And, you know, I think I deserve it. And then I felt like God said to me in my heart, are you not content with what I've given you? That you're trying to snatch something? And I said, oh, all right, Lord, because God had been very good to me. He had provided for me in various ways. So I said, okay, Lord, I'll pay the taxes and I'll forget the holidays. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, one of my flatmates was saying, oh, I know you're going on your holiday soon, aren't you? And I said, well, I'm not actually. And she said, well, why is that? And I explained about the taxes. And she said, oh, Kristina, I wouldn't enjoy my holiday if I didn't think you were going to have a holiday. And she gave me £400, which, 20 years ago was a lot of money. And with what I already had, it was enough for me to go on holiday. So it meant I did get my holiday because God actually wanted me to go on holiday, but he had another way of providing for me.